A few weeks ago, I decided to sell my bookshelf on Facebook Marketplace. It was a sleek modern piece I had bought from Homecrafts Online about 2 years ago. Since I wasn't using it anymore, I figured it was time to let it go. After posting an ad with clear pictures and a reasonable price, I waited for someone to reach out. Days passed with no responses, and I was starting to lose hope. Then one afternoon I got a call. "Hi, my name is Lucas," the man said. His voice was calm and polite. "I'm interested in the bookshelf, but could you send me more pictures? Maybe the front and back?" "Sure," I said, "give me a few minutes." I took additional photos from every angle to make sure he had a good view and sent them to him. About 10 minutes later, Lucas called me again. "I like it," he said, "and your price is fair. How about I come by this evening to check it out?" "That sounds good," I replied. "What time works for you? I can be there around 6 p.m. Lucas said. "Perfect," I said, happy to have a buyer. That evening, I cleaned the bookshelf one last time, making sure it looked perfect for Lucas's visit. At around 6:20 p.m., I heard the doorbell ring. I opened the door, and there he was. Lucas was a tall, thin man, wearing a dark hoodie and a baseball cap. "Sorry for being late," he said with a polite smile. "No problem, come on in," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. As Lucas entered my house, I noticed his eyes darting around the living room, almost like he was scanning the place. It felt a little odd, but I brushed it off, thinking he was just curious. I led him to the bookshelf, which I had placed near the door to my bedroom. "Here it is," I said, gesturing to the bookshelf. Lucas approached it, inspecting it closely. He walked around it, ran his hands along the sides, and crouched down to check the base. After a few moments, he frowned. "This doesn't look like the one in the pictures," he said, his tone skeptical. "Is it the same one?" I replied, confused. "No, it's not," Lucas insisted, shaking his head. "It looks different somehow." I was frustrated. I knew it was the same bookshelf. I had taken the pictures just a few days ago and hadn't moved it since. I told him as much, but he wouldn't budge. "Sorry, but I'm going to pass," Lucas finally said, shrugging. Without another word, he turned and left, leaving me feeling both confused and disappointed. I had needed to sell the bookshelf, and Lucas backing out left me frustrated. I decided to shake it off and spend the rest of the evening relaxing in my room. Hours passed, and I started to feel better. By 11 p.m., I was getting ready for bed when I heard the sound of someone trying to turn my front doorknob. My heart raced. Who would be trying to get in at this hour? I crept to the front window and peered outside. To my shock, it was Lucas. "What is he doing?" I whispered to myself, feeling uneasy. Lucas stood at the door, jiggling the handle as though he was trying to open it. Then he suddenly moved toward the side of the house, disappearing from view. My panic grew as I realized he might be heading for the backyard. I quickly checked all the doors and windows, making sure they were locked. Thankfully, everything was secure, but the sense of danger was overwhelming. Suddenly, I heard a soft knock at one of the windows. Then another knock at a different window. Lucas was moving around the house, knocking on windows and peering inside. I felt trapped inside my own home. I knew I had to act quickly. Grabbing my phone, I dialed the local police station and told them what was happening. "There's a man outside my house trying to get in," I said, my voice shaking. "He came earlier pretending to buy something, and now he's trying to break in." "Stay calm," the officer said. "We're sending someone right away." I stayed in a corner of the room, away from the windows, trying not to make any noise. I kept glancing at the clock every few seconds. It felt like an eternity, but within 10 minutes I saw flashing blue and red lights outside. Lucas must have seen the police too, because he bolted. I watched from the window as the officers chased after him. He didn't get far before they caught him near the end of the street. After they had him in custody, an officer came to my door. I explained everything from Lucas's initial visit to the strange behavior and attempted break-in. "You did the right thing calling us," the officer said. "It's a good thing you kept your doors locked." Lucas didn't manage to break in, and I think he got off without facing serious charges. However, I can't help but think he was scouting for a way to break into my house. I'm so thankful he didn't succeed, and that the police arrived quickly. This experience has left me much more cautious. I've learned to be more careful when dealing with strangers, especially when selling things online. It's a scary reminder that not everyone has good intentions, and sometimes trusting your instincts can make all the difference. I wanted to create a proper study space for my older son. He had just started middle school, and his workload was piling up. A dedicated area with a desk and chair seemed like the perfect way to help him stay organized and focused. Between work deadlines and the chaos of raising two kids, finding affordable furniture within my budget felt impossible. That's when I turned to Facebook Marketplace. I had used it before for smaller purchases. While I had heard some unsettling stories, I never imagined I would end up in one myself. One evening, as I scrolled through listings, I came across a beautiful oak desk. It had the classic charm I wanted and was ridiculously cheap. The seller, a man named Dan, messaged me shortly after I inquired. He seemed polite and straightforward, responding quickly. Dan explained that the desk was stored in a unit because he was downsizing and couldn't fit it in his new place. Would tomorrow morning work, he asked. I hesitated for a moment. Meeting someone at a storage unit felt off, but his listing had clear photos and his profile seemed legitimate. I wanted that desk, so I ignored the uneasy feeling and agreed. The next morning, I drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. Rows of identical units stretched in both directions, their metal doors gleaming under the winter sun. Apart from a distant maintenance worker, the place was empty. Dan arrived a few minutes later in an old blue pickup truck. He stepped out, wearing a baseball cap and flannel shirt. He greeted me quickly. "The desk's in here," he said, gesturing to a unit halfway down the row. He unlocked the padlock and rolled the door open, revealing a dimly lit space packed with furniture, boxes, and tools. "Looks like it's in good shape," I said. "Mind if I take a closer look?" "Of course." "Come on in. It's in the back," he said. I paused. Something about stepping into the cramped space made me hesitate. Still, he held the door open, so I walked in. The air inside smelled stale, a mix of dust and old wood. The desk was tucked behind a stack of chairs. Dan moved a few things aside. "It's in great condition," he said. He was right. The dark oak was polished and scratch-free, and the drawers slid smoothly. I was about to tell him I would take it when I heard the metal door slide shut behind me. The sound echoed and I froze. Dan had closed the door and snapped the padlock into place. "It's just so no one disturbs us," he said with a grin. My stomach dropped. I forced a smile, stepping back to create space between us. "I should check if the desk will fit in my car. My husband's waiting outside. He's better at judging these things." Dan's grin faltered for a second before returning. "Oh, I didn't see anyone in your car when I pulled up." "Are you sure he's out there?" My heart raced. He had been watching that closely? "Yeah," I said, trying to sound calm. "He's probably walking around. He hates sitting in the car." Dan crossed his arms and studied me. "You seem nervous. Everything okay?" "Perfectly fine," I said, forcing a laugh. "I just get claustrophobic. Let's go outside so I can check the desk dimensions." Dan didn't move right away. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. After what felt like forever, he shrugged and unlocked the door. The moment it opened, I ran. I didn't care how it looked. I just wanted to get to my car. Dan called after me, but I didn't stop. Once inside my car with the doors locked, I grabbed my phone and called the police. Dan walked to his truck, calm and unhurried, as though nothing had happened. He drove off before the officers arrived. The police took my statement and inspected the unit, but there wasn't much they could do. Dan hadn't technically done anything illegal, though his behavior was suspicious. "Next time, meet in a public place," one officer said, "and never go into an enclosed space with someone you don't know." I felt angry, at Dan for making me feel unsafe, and at myself for ignoring my instincts. I was lucky I had thought quickly and lied about my husband. I don't know what might have happened if I hadn't. For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about his grin or how he asked if I was alone. I stopped using Facebook Marketplace altogether. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was to get out of that situation unharmed. It's a lesson I won't forget. No matter how harmless someone seems, you can never be too careful when you're alone. I had just moved into a new apartment. As a broke post-grad, all I had were a few boxes of stuff from my parents' house. It felt great to finally have my place, but I had no furniture. None. I was living off takeout, sitting on the floor, and trying to pretend I didn't miss having a bed or even a chair. Since I didn't have any extra cash, I decided to check out the free section on Facebook Marketplace. If you've ever browsed for furniture on Marketplace, you'll know what I was up against. Most of it was old, falling apart, or straight up nasty. Still, I figured I might stumble on something decent if I kept scrolling. I wasn't looking for a dream setup, just something that could get me by for a while. After nearly an hour of digging through listings, I was about to give up when I decided to refresh the page. That's when I saw it, a post titled "Brand New Couch, Never Used, Free for Pickup." The post was fresh, less than a minute old. The couch looked flawless in the pictures, and it was free. I immediately messaged the seller, letting them know I was interested. Within minutes, I got a reply. "Yeah, the couch is all yours if you can pick it up tonight. I'm available anytime after 9 p.m. Something about the late time made me pause. It wasn't just that it was late. It was that the guy seemed insistent on after-dark pickup. But I figured he probably had a job or a busy schedule. I really needed that couch, so I replied that I'd be there and waited for the evening to roll around. At 8:30 p.m., I texted to say I was on my way. That's when I noticed the address. It was way out in the middle of nowhere. I lived near the Rocky Mountains, so I was used to rural areas, but this was beyond remote. My GPS estimated a 45-minute drive, so I grabbed my keys and headed out. As I drove, the houses and streetlights disappeared. The paved roads gave way to gravel, and eventually, my GPS guided me onto a narrow dirt path surrounded by trees. I was starting to feel uneasy, but I kept telling myself it would be worth it for the couch. Finally, I arrived. The house was a decent size, surprisingly nice for being so far out. There was nothing else around for miles. No cars, no neighbors, just trees and an eerie silence. Somehow, I still had cell service, so I sent a text letting the guy know I was there. His reply came almost instantly. "Okay." I wasn't sure what to make of the response, but I took it as my cue to go up to the door. I knocked, and a muffled voice called out from inside. "The door's unlocked. Come on in." The voice was calm, almost too calm. It sounded like whoever was speaking was standing right behind the door. I opened it just enough to peek inside and immediately felt my stomach drop. The house was pitch black. Not a single light was on. Back then, phone flashlights weren't a thing, so I had to rely on the faint moonlight coming through the windows. I hesitated at the doorway and called out, "Hello?" The same voice replied, this time from a door on my left that was slightly open. It led to a basement. "Come on down. The couch is ready to be moved," the voice said. That was it for me. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I called back, "Actually, I think I'll come back later," and turned toward the door. Without waiting for a response, I yanked the front door open and sprinted to my car. As I climbed in and locked the doors, I glanced back at the house. Through one of the windows, I could see the shadows of several men standing there, watching me. I didn't wait to see what they'd do. I started the car and drove as fast as I could back to my apartment. When I got home, I checked my phone. The guy had sent 3 messages. The first asked why I left. The second asked if I still wanted the couch. The third simply said, "You're lucky." I felt a chill run through me. I deleted the app and vowed never to use Marketplace again. To this day, I'm convinced those men in that house had no intention of giving me a couch. A couple of years ago, my phone broke. It had been old, and I'd been meaning to replace it anyway, but breaking forced my hand. I needed a new phone quickly. I considered heading to a store or browsing online, but to save some money, I decided to check out Facebook Marketplace. I figured I'd find a decent deal and get it fast. I'd heard that Marketplace had some good phones for cheap, so I dove in. After about 30 minutes of scrolling, I found one. It was the same model as my old phone, but a few generations newer. Even better, the price was shockingly low compared to what I'd seen elsewhere. Without thinking twice, I sent a message to the seller to express my interest. The seller's profile was odd. Their name was just RK. No profile picture, no posts, no details. It was one of those bare-bones accounts that made you hesitate for a second. Still, I figured they were just someone private or not very active online, so I didn't dwell on it. I got a reply from them within minutes. RK told me I could buy the phone that very night, which sounded perfect. I suggested we meet at a local shopping center, a safe, public spot. But RK said they couldn't because they had kids and couldn't leave the house. Instead, I'd have to come to them. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. It made sense. If they had young kids, leaving home might be tricky. RK sent me their address, and around the agreed time that evening, I drove out to meet them. The drive was about 15 minutes, and the address was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. The neighborhood felt a little rundown. Houses were spaced far apart, each sitting on a large lot. When I arrived, the house itself looked worn and dim, with no visible lights on inside. Without my phone, I couldn't text the seller to say I'd arrived, but I had my watch and was on time. I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. After about 30 seconds, the door cracked open slightly, a couple of inches. There were two doors, a screen door and a solid inside door. Through the gap, I saw a woman. She didn't open the door further. Instead, she said, "Go around to the back," then closed the door. That was weird, but I decided to go along with it. I walked around to the back of the house and entered through the back door as instructed. It led into a dimly lit kitchen. The woman was there sitting at a table. The kitchen was the only lit room in the house, and the light was barely enough to see. The rest of the place was pitch black. Feeling a little awkward, I sat down across from her. The silence between us stretched for a few uncomfortable moments before I finally broke it by mentioning the phone. She nodded and said she'd go get it. Without another word, she stood up and left the kitchen. I stayed seated, waiting. The longer I sat there, the stranger the whole situation felt. The house didn't seem lived in. There were no toys or any signs of kids, which struck me as odd since that was the reason she said she couldn't meet me elsewhere. 5 minutes passed and I started to get impatient. I called out, asking if she was okay. She responded from another room, saying, "Just a moment." Another 5 minutes dragged by. The house was eerily quiet and I was starting to feel genuinely uneasy. Why was it taking her so long? Finally, I stood up and walked to the edge of the kitchen, peering into the next room. It seemed to be a living room, completely dark except for a faint sliver of light coming from a hallway beyond it. I called out again, asking what was going on, but this time there was no response. As I stood there watching the hallway, I thought I saw movement, someone walking across it. I assumed it was the woman, but she didn't say anything or acknowledge me. That was the breaking point. I stepped back into the kitchen, debating what to do. Every instinct told me to leave. Without waiting any longer, I walked to the back door, stepped outside, and headed straight for my car. As I got in, I glanced back at the house. A light had turned on in a front window that had been dark before. Standing there in the window was the woman, staring directly at me. Her expression was blank, and she didn't move. She just watched as I drove away. When I got home, I decided I'd had enough of sketchy online deals. The next day, I went to a store and bought a phone the normal way. It cost more, but it was worth every penny for the peace of mind. I'll never forget how unsettling that night was, and to this day, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left when I did. I've been a carpenter for over a decade, which means I've accumulated a lot of tools. Some of them have been sitting around unused for years, so I decided to list a few for trade on Facebook Marketplace. I wasn't opposed to selling them outright, but trades sometimes feel more straightforward, and I'd been on the hunt for a good lawnmower since my old one finally quit on me. Not long after posting, I got a message from a guy named Joshua. He was interested in trading his lawnmower for my high-powered drill. The pictures he sent showed a mower in fantastic condition, almost new, much better than anything I could afford if I just sold the drill. Joshua seemed friendly enough in our messages, and we quickly agreed on the trade. He suggested I come to his house to check out the mower and make sure I was satisfied before finalizing the deal. At the time, it seemed reasonable. He said he'd demonstrate how to use it, which I appreciated since I hadn't bought a new mower in years. He gave me his address, about 25 minutes away, in a neighborhood I didn't know well but hadn't heard anything bad about. I thought, what's the worst that could happen? That Saturday afternoon, I loaded the drill, along with some extra bits in case Joshua wanted them, into my truck and headed to his place. The neighborhood was quiet, older homes, kids playing in a few yards, and plenty of parked cars. But as I pulled up to Joshua's house, something felt a little off. The lawn wasn't as tidy as the others on the street, and there was an old sedan parked haphazardly in the driveway. The house itself wasn't in terrible shape, but every window had the blinds drawn, and the porch light was on even though it was broad daylight. I brushed it off. People have their quirks. Joshua came out to greet me as I parked. He matched his profile picture, middle-aged, scruffy beard and casual demeanor. He waved and motioned for me to pull up closer to the driveway. I parked near it, but didn't pull in all the way, which in hindsight was a good call. "Hey, thanks for coming by," he said, friendly enough. "The mower's out back. You want to take a look?" "Sure," I said, grabbing the drill from my passenger seat. Joshua led me around the side of the house to his backyard, where the lawnmower was sitting on a patch of dirt. It looked just like the photos, clean, shiny, and in great condition. Joshua demonstrated how it worked, pulling the starter cord and letting me test it on a small patch of grass. It seemed like a good deal. I was just about ready to finalize the trade when I heard the sound of another car pulling up. Turning around, I saw an older truck parking at the end of the driveway, effectively blocking my truck in. A tall, bulky man I didn't recognize stepped out. He wore a dirty tank top and jeans and didn't say a word. Joshua glanced at him, then back at me with a suddenly less friendly expression. "Oh, that's my buddy Pete," he said too casually. Pete leaned against his truck, arms crossed, staring at us. A flicker of unease hit me. Why was Joshua's friend here for a simple trade? "So," Joshua said, his tone shifting, "about the lawnmower, how much do you think it's worth in cash?" I frowned. "It retails for about $400 new, but we agreed on a trade." Joshua scratched his neck, his demeanor turning oddly sheepish. "Yeah, but Pete and I were talking, and we figured it'd be better if you just gave us the drill and threw in, say, $200 cash. That work for you?" My stomach tightened. "I don't have that kind of cash on me," I said firmly. We agreed on the trade. Pete pushed off his truck and took a step closer. "You sure about that, man? You've got a nice truck there. Bet there's a wallet in it." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about the trade. It was a setup. My truck was blocked in, and these two had other intentions. "Tell you what," I said, forcing a smile. "Let me check my truck. I might have some cash in there." Joshua and Pete exchanged a look, then nodded. I turned and walked toward the front yard, my pace quickening as I neared my truck. Once I reached it, I didn't hesitate. I jumped in, slammed the door, and hit the lock button. Joshua and Pete must have realized what I was doing because they started running toward me. Pete was closer, but I didn't give him a chance to reach me. I threw the truck into drive, the tires spinning as I veered onto the grass. Pete banged on the side of the truck, yelling something I couldn't hear over the engine's roar. I didn't stop until I was several blocks away. When I felt safe, I pulled into a Walmart parking lot and called the police. The dispatcher was calm and professional, taking down Joshua's address, descriptions of both men, and a summary of what had happened. She assured me an officer would follow up. A few days later, the police called back. They had visited Joshua's house and questioned him. He tried to claim that I'd backed out of the trade, painting himself as the reasonable party. But the officers weren't buying it. Joshua was already on their radar for other shady marketplace deals. He had a pattern of luring people to his house under pretenses, with situations often escalating like mine had. It was a relief to know the police were onto him, but the whole experience left me shaken. If I hadn't acted quickly, things could have ended much worse. Now I'm much more cautious with online trades. I only meet in public places and never go alone. That lawnmower could have cost me more than just some cash. It could have cost me my safety. It's a lesson I won't forget.